Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going way back in time,
Mm.
diving into a story of rebuilding and renewal. You've probably heard of a census, right? Like everyone knows what a census is.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine one that's not just about numbers,
Oh, yeah.
but actually reveals how a community rebuilds itself.
After being scattered and displaced.
Yeah, exactly. It's about coming back together
Reestablishing their identity.
and setting the stage for a new chapter.
Yeah.
And to unpack all this, we're going to be looking at
The book of Nehemiah.
chapters 7, 8, and 9.
Absolutely. We'll uncover how this community returning to Jerusalem after exile.
Okay, so after exile.
They used a census and a covenant to rebuild their society, both physically and spiritually.
It's like a blueprint.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so picture this. Jerusalem.
Okay.
The walls have just been rebuilt. And a massive symbol of security after years of vulnerability.
Imagine finally being able to lock your doors after living in a house with no walls for years.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Right.
So the walls represent a return to normalcy, a sense of safety.
After chaos. An order, yeah.
But Nehemiah, the leader of this rebuilding effort,
He's not just focused on bricks and mortar.
I was going to say it's more than just the physical rebuilding, right?
Exactly. He's deeply concerned with who is inside those walls, who makes up this new community.
Okay.
So he undertakes a meticulous census.
It's not just a head count, though, is it?
No, it's not. It's much deeper than that.
It feels like piecing together a puzzle, right? Like reconnecting all these scattered pieces.
Yes. Reconnecting the fragments of a people who had been dispersed for generations. Nehemiah is meticulously recording not just names, but lineages,
Wow.
tracing family lines back to their ancestors.
And he's establishing
To share history and heritage.
Yeah, it's rebuilding their collective memory.
Helping them understand where they come from and where they belong.
That sense of belonging must have been so important after the exile.
Absolutely crucial. And the details in the census are just amazing.
I was going to say, let's get into those details.
Family after family listed.
The sons of Perish, the sons of Shephatiah.
The sons of Elam.
It goes on and on.
There's so many names.
But each name represents a story, right?
Exactly. Each name is a family who endured hardship and now has a chance to start anew.
A new beginning.
And in these details, we see the human impact of exile and return.
Give me an example.
Like the sons of Zatur, only 81 of them returned.
81. Wow.
Think about what that means. A once thriving family reduced to a fraction of its former size.
That puts things into perspective.
Their story, and countless others like it, are woven into this census.
It's a powerful reminder.
These aren't just numbers, they're lives.
Right.
Families, legacies.
What would it have been like to be one of those returning families?
Imagine seeing Jerusalem, their ancestral home.
Maybe for the first time.
For many, yes. And to know that they are part of this incredible rebuilding effort.
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And even their animals are counted. I mean, 6,720 donkeys. That's a lot of donkeys.
Can you imagine the noise?
I can't even imagine.
But more than just a funny detail, this tells us about their journey.
Okay.
How they traveled, the resources they had.
Donkeys were important back then, right?
Donkeys were essential for transport.
Right.
So they may have relied heavily on trade, maybe a specific type of agriculture.
Interesting. We get a glimpse into their daily lives through these details.
It's fascinating. And it wasn't just about everyday folks either.
Oh, yeah, there were other groups listed, right?
Priests, Levites.
Singers, gatekeepers.
Even Solomon's servants are mentioned.
It's like Nehemiah is trying to recreate every part of their society.
Recreating the tapestry of their society, yeah.
Making sure every thread, every role is woven back in.
This is what makes the census so unique. It's not just a dry list of names. It's like a blueprint for their future. A carefully curated community designed to function according to their laws and traditions.
It's a society being rebuilt from the ground up.
With each group playing a vital role.
But there's also this interesting detail
Oh, yes.
about people who couldn't prove their lineage
Right.
and were excluded from certain roles.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you think about how they were figuring out identity and belonging.
In this newly formed community.
Who gets to be considered a true member?
Exactly. You can imagine the complexities.
Oh, I'm sure.
Generations of intermingling, lost records, maybe even disputes over family histories.
Wow, yeah.
This census, while a powerful tool for rebuilding, also reveals the potential for division
Yeah.
and exclusion, reminding us that even in a shared endeavor, questions of identity
Right.
and belonging can be fraught with tension.
That's a good point.
Yes.
So we have this incredible snapshot of who came back to Jerusalem, but then the mood shifts, right?
Yes.
In Nehemiah chapter 8, we go from lists of names to a public reading and this really powerful communal response.
It's like witnessing a transition from the practicalities of rebuilding to the reestablishment of their spiritual foundations. The census brought them together physically, and now they need something to unite them spiritually.
To remind them of who they are.
Precisely.
And what better way to do that than by hearing the law of Moses read aloud? Thousands of people gathered, hearing these words that defined their faith, their history, their identity,
Especially after generations of being away from Jerusalem.
away from their traditional practices.
Well, exactly.
To hear these words spoken aloud.
It would have been a powerful moment
I bet.
of reconnection, a chance to rediscover their roots and reclaim their heritage.
It wasn't just a boring recitation of rules, though, right?
At all.
The text says that people were weeping as they heard the words of the law,
It must have been incredibly emotional.
especially after everything they'd been through.
Think about it. These words weren't just abstract principles to them.
They were a lifeline.
Yes, a connection to their past, a promise for their future. They had just rebuilt their city,
Reestablished their community.
and now they're hearing the words that gave meaning to it all.
No wonder they were moved to tears. But then Nehemiah and the Levites tell everyone to celebrate.
They do.
The joy of the Lord is your strength.
It's a reminder that even in the face of hardship and struggle, there's still room for joy, for celebration.
Faith isn't just about being solemn and following all the rules.
Right.
It's about finding joy and strength,
In their shared beliefs.
especially in the face of rebuilding and renewal. And this reminder of joy leads perfectly into the next part of their story, the rediscovery and celebration of the Feast of Booths.
Oh, this is a good one.
This isn't just any feast.
It's deeply symbolic, especially after their return from exile,
They're building temporary shelters.
remembering their ancestors' time wandering in the wilderness.
Powerful imagery.
It is. It's a way to acknowledge their own vulnerability
Their dependence on God.
and the fragility of their newfound security.
Think about how much weight this feast must have carried for them.
It wasn't just about remembering the past.
It was about connecting it to their present, right?
Yes. Understanding their own journey in light of their ancestors' experiences. And the text tells us they hadn't celebrated this feast properly since the days of Joshua.
Really? Since
Yeah.
Joshua.
It suggests a deliberate effort to revive a long-neglected practice.
Reconnecting with their heritage.
Another step in rebuilding their identity as a people.
Another piece of the puzzle falling into place.
Mm.
And you can almost feel the energy in this scene. After all the hardship and uncertainty, they're rediscovering their traditions, celebrating together, reclaiming their identity. It's a beautiful moment of communal joy.
And reconnection. They're finally exhaling, allowing themselves to experience the fullness of their faith,
Not just the rules.
but also the joy of celebration. It's a reminder that faith is a lived experience.
Full of both challenges and moments of pure joy and connection.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But then we move into Nehemiah chapter 9,
Oh, here we go.
and the tone shifts again.
I was going to say, it feels like a bit of a turn, doesn't it?
The celebratory mood gives way to a much more solemn gathering.
Okay.
This time it's about fasting,
Fasting.
sackcloth, and confession.
What's happening here? Why the sudden change?
It might seem sudden, but it makes sense in the context of their journey.
Okay.
They've rebuilt their city, rediscovered their laws, celebrated their traditions. But now, after all that, they're taking a moment to reflect.
To look inward.
Yes, acknowledging that rebuilding isn't just about external structures. It's about internal transformation, too.
They're saying, okay, we've come this far, but now it's time to look inward, to acknowledge our shortcomings.
To make sure we're building on solid ground.
Not just physically, but morally and spiritually as well.
And that's precisely what they do. The Levites lead the people in a powerful prayer of confession,
A prayer of confession.
acknowledging their history, both the triumphs and the failures, their ancestors' faithfulness, and their own shortcomings.
This sounds intense.
It is intense, but also incredibly cathartic. They're not just listing their sins, they're acknowledging the consequences of their actions.
The ways they've strayed from their covenant with God.
A moment of deep introspection, recognizing that true rebuilding requires more than just outward conformity. It demands inward transformation.
So this prayer, this confession, it's not about feeling guilty.
No.
It's about taking responsibility
Exactly.
for their past and setting the stage for a new way of life, a new way of living in alignment with their faith.
And that leads us to the culmination of this entire journey, the covenant they make in Nehemiah chapter 9. This isn't just a casual agreement.
This is serious business.
It's a formal, binding commitment, a public declaration of their intention to live according to God's law. They're drawing a line in the sand saying, this is who we are now, this is what we stand for.
And why is a written covenant so important in this context?
In the ancient Near East, a written covenant was a serious matter.
More than just symbolic.
Oh, much more. It was a legally binding document with real consequences for breaking it. It's a public record of their commitment.
Holding them accountable.
To their promises, to God, and to each other.
So it's not just a spiritual agreement.
It's a social contract. A blueprint for how they intend to govern themselves, live together, and build a just and flourishing society.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have, from a detailed census,
revealing those human stories of return and belonging,
to a powerful scene of public reading and emotional response,
to a solemn moment of confession, and a bold commitment to a new way of life.
And this is just the beginning.
There's so much more to unpack in this fascinating historical record.
We've set the stage, explored the foundations of this community's rebuilding efforts.
Right.
But the real story, the real drama, unfolds as they attempt to live out this covenant.
Navigating those complexities.
Balancing their ideals with the realities of life in a constantly changing world.
This is going to be good.
Whoa.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the book of Nehemiah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the book of Nehemiah. Last time we left off with
the covenant.
The people making this incredible covenant. Yeah, this promise to live according to God's law. It felt like a turning point.
A commitment to a new future.
A new future based on their shared values. But, as we all know,
making a promise is one thing.
Right?
Keeping it, that's a whole other story.
That's the truth. How many times have we all vowed to start a new diet, a new workout routine?
A new anything.
And then
back to the old habits.
We slip right back. It's human nature, right?
It is. So I'm really curious to see how these folks navigated the challenges of actually living out their commitment.
Well, let's dive right in and see what unfolds.
Okay.
Nehemiah chapter 9 lays out the specifics of their covenant. And one of the first things that jumps out at me is their commitment to separating themselves from foreign influences. Anything that might lead them astray from their faith.
Okay, so they're trying to create a clear boundary.
They're drawing a line in the sand between who they are and the world around them.
That sounds intense. It's like they're building a wall, not just around their city, but around their way of life.
You could say that.
But can you really separate yourself completely from the world? Especially when you're trying to rebuild a society, reestablish trade, reconnect with neighboring communities.
That's a great point. It seems like there's going to be some tension there, right?
It does.
The desire for purity, for maintaining that distinct identity.
Yeah.
It often clashes with the realities of living in a diverse world.
A diverse and interconnected world.
Exactly. And this tension plays out throughout the book. We see examples of intermarriage, economic entanglement, cultural exchange.
All these things that test their commitment.
They constantly test their commitment to separation, yeah.
It makes me think about our world today. Globalization, social media, the constant flow of information and ideas. It's impossible to completely isolate ourselves these days.
And just like in Nehemiah's time, those encounters with different cultures and beliefs can be both enriching and challenging.
It's a double-edged sword.
It is. They force us to examine our own values, confront our biases, and figure out how to live in a world where diversity is the norm.
So if separating themselves completely wasn't realistic, what were some of the specific things they committed to? What did this new way of life actually look like?
Okay, well, one of the central tenets was observing the Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Setting aside the seventh day for rest and worship.
That was a big deal for them, right?
It was a core practice in their faith, a way to honor God and set themselves apart from other nations.
It's like a weekly reminder of who they are and what they believe.
A way to hit the pause button on the busyness of life and reconnect with something bigger than themselves.
Love that. And the Sabbath wasn't just about individual piety. It was woven into the fabric of their society, right?
Absolutely. It affected everything.
Work schedules.
Social gatherings, everything. It was a visible marker of their identity, a reminder of their covenant with God that permeated their daily lives.
And then there were those commitments to social justice and economic fairness too, right?
Oh, yes. They vowed not to exploit the poor,
Or indebted.
to cancel debts every 7 years.
To ensure that everyone had access to land.
They were creating a blueprint for a more just and equitable society.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. They weren't just talking the talk, they were walking the walk.
It shows a deep concern for the well-being of all, not just the privileged few.
I wonder if their recent experience of exile, of hardship and loss, made them more sensitive to the needs of the poor and marginalized.
That's an interesting thought.
Maybe going through that collective trauma gave them a deeper understanding of the importance of communal care and support.
It's definitely possible. Shared experiences, especially those that involve suffering and loss, can forge a powerful sense of empathy and solidarity.
Like they're saying, we've been through the fire together, and we're not going to leave anyone behind now.
Exactly. But let's be realistic. They were human, right?
Oh yeah, they weren't perfect.
Did they actually manage to live up to all these lofty ideals?
It sounds great on paper, but human nature being what it is, I can't imagine it was always smooth sailing.
You're right. The book doesn't shy away from the messiness of human nature. It shows us both the triumphs and the failures,
The good and the bad.
the moments of inspiration and the times when they fell short.
So tell me, what were some of those moments of backsliding? What kind of challenges did they face?
Well, remember that commitment to separation we talked about?
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest areas of struggle. They kept getting pulled back into the orbit of those foreign influences they were trying to avoid.
It's hard to resist those human connections, right? Especially when you're interacting with people, forming relationships, doing business. You can't just build a wall and expect the world to stay on the other side.
Exactly. And we see this playing out in various ways. There are examples of intermarriage, which was a huge taboo,
Seen as a threat to their identity?
a threat to their religious and cultural identity. Yeah. We see them getting entangled in economic dealings that compromise their principles. And there's evidence of cultural exchange, adopting practices and beliefs from their neighbors,
Blurring the line.
blurring the lines they were trying to maintain.
So it's this constant push and pull between wanting to preserve their identity and the reality of living in a world where boundaries are constantly being crossed,
That sounds familiar.
doesn't it? It's a dilemma we all face in our own lives.
We do. How do we hold on to our values, our traditions, our sense of self in a world that's constantly changing?
A world that's constantly challenging us to adapt and evolve
It's all about finding that balance.
between staying true to ourselves and being open to new experiences and ideas.
And the book of Nehemiah shows us that there's no easy answer, no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
Sometimes they respond to these challenges with renewed resolve, doubling down on their commitment.
Okay.
Other times they compromise, adapt, find ways to bend the rules without breaking them. It's a dynamic process.
It reflects those complexities of trying to live out your values in the real world.
A messy, unpredictable world.
They're constantly having to renegotiate the terms of the covenant, figuring out what works and what doesn't.
And how to stay true to the spirit of their agreement, even as circumstances change.
It highlights the fact that commitments aren't static.
They're not set in stone.
They're living, breathing things,
That need to be revisited, reinterpreted.
sometimes even renegotiated as we navigate the twists and turns of life.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've gone from a list of names to a scene of covenant making to a nuanced exploration of the challenges and compromises that come with trying to live up to one's ideals.
It's a story that feels both ancient and incredibly relevant to our own lives.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in this fascinating historical record.
Don't worry, folks, because we'll be back in part 3 to delve even deeper into the legacy of this covenant and what lessons we can learn from this ancient story for our own lives and communities. Buckle up, because it's about to get really interesting. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been unpacking this incredible story from the book of Nehemiah.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. How this community rebuilt not just their city walls, but their entire way of life. And, let's be real here, they weren't perfect.
No, not at all.
There were some missteps along the way.
Compromises, backsliding, you name it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But isn't that kind of reassuring in a way?
I think it is.
It makes them feel more human. more relatable.
It shows us that even with the best intentions, living up to our ideals is a journey
It's a lifelong process.
full of twists and turns. And it's not about achieving some kind of flawless perfection.
Right.
It's about striving, learning, and adapting along the way.
Okay, so it's not about being perfect. Then what is it about? What's the main takeaway from all of this? What can we learn from their struggles, their successes, their whole journey?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways is resilience.
Resilience.
Despite the challenges, the setbacks, the backsliding, they never completely gave up on their covenant.
They kept coming back to it.
They kept reevaluating, recommitting, finding ways to make it work in their ever-changing reality.
They understood that rebuilding wasn't a one-time event.
Right.
It was an ongoing process.
A constant cycle of reflection, adjustment, and renewal.
That's a powerful lesson for us today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Whether it's rebuilding a relationship, a community, or even just our own sense of self.
We have to accept that it's going to be messy,
Imperfect.
and there will be setbacks along the way.
It's more about progress than perfection.
And maybe that's okay.
I think so.
Maybe it's in those moments of struggle when we fall short that we learn the most.
About ourselves, about our values, about what we're truly committed to.
It's in those moments that grace and forgiveness becomes so important.
Absolutely. They didn't condemn themselves for every misstep. They acknowledged their mistakes, sought forgiveness, and found ways to move forward.
It was crucial for their growth and transformation.
They understood that holding on to guilt and shame would only sabotage their efforts to rebuild.
So they had to let go of the past
Embrace the present
and keep moving forward.
with that spirit of hope and determination.
It's pretty inspiring.
Incredibly inspiring. It speaks to the fact that building a better future requires a willingness to be both compassionate and courageous.
Compassionate towards ourselves and others when we stumble.
And courageous enough to keep striving, keep learning, keep reaching for that vision of a more just and fulfilling life.
But this wasn't just about individual growth, was it? This covenant, their commitment to a shared set of values, it had a much wider impact.
You're right. It wasn't just a private agreement. It was a public declaration that shaped their whole society.
Their commitment to social justice.
Their concern for the poor and marginalized.
Their emphasis on communal responsibility.
All of it flowed from this covenant. It became the foundation for their laws, their social structures, their interactions with each other and the world.
They were rebuilding their entire way of life.
It's like they were saying, we're not just gonna restore what was lost. We're gonna create something new, something better.
A society that reflects their deepest values and aspirations.
And that's what makes this story so powerful.
It shows us that our commitments, our values, they have the power to shape not just our own lives, but the world around us.
They create a ripple effect that extends far beyond our individual spheres.
Influencing our families, our communities.
And future generations.
It makes you think about the legacy we're all leaving behind.
Yeah.
What are the values, the commitments, the choices that are shaping the world we're creating? For ourselves and for those who come after us.
It's a question we should all ask ourselves. As we wrap up this deep dive into the book of Nehemiah, I think the most important takeaway is this.
Okay.
We all have the power to choose what we build, what we restore, what we leave behind.
That's a big responsibility.
It is a responsibility we can't afford to ignore, because the choices we make today will echo through the generations to come.
That's a powerful thought. It's a reminder that history isn't just something we read about in books. It's something we're creating.
Yeah.
Every decision we make, every commitment we uphold, every act of courage and compassion.
We're all part of this ongoing story.
And just like the people in Nehemiah's time, we have the opportunity to contribute to a story of rebuilding and renewal.
A story that continues to unfold even today.
This deep dive has been such an amazing journey. We started with a list of names, and we ended up exploring some really deep concepts.
The complexities of human nature, the power of resilience, the enduring legacy of shared commitments.
It's a story that reminds us that even in the face of hardship and setbacks, we can choose to rebuild, to renew, to create a world that reflects our highest aspirations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as insightful and inspiring as we did.
And remember, no matter what challenges you face, you always have the power to choose what you build, what you restore, what you leave behind.
Keep diving deep, folks, and keep striving for a better future.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.